Welcome to the Water People podcast, where we talk story with some of the most adept water folk on the planet. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. For us, the podcast is a chance to dive into the aquatic experiences that really shape who we become back on land. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people and elders past, present, and emerging. Today we're in conversation with psychiatrist and surfer Elizabeth Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen specializes in cross-cultural psychiatry, the intersection of spirituality and mental health, and the healing power of water and the living world. She was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. Her parents were refugees from Vietnam who arrived in Honolulu in 1975 at the end of the Vietnam War. Dr. Nguyen recently released her first novel, Aloha Vietnam. We caught up with Elizabeth remotely to talk about her insightful book and her medical practice, specifically her practice of prescribing water as medicine. Before we dive into our chat, we asked Elizabeth to read the short opening passage from her novel, a piece called Tide Lands.
My people arose from mountains and sea, joined by a marriage of dragons and spirit, birthing life where waves caress shore. My people hold on to the ability to move between two worlds in one breath, earth and ether, sea and sky, heaven and hell. I tried to imagine what kept my grandparents alive when the rice ran out, when stomachs knot in hunger, incense smoke clouds the air. I tried to imagine what kept my people afloat on the boats that leaked urine, feces, and death into murky waters not wanting to be seen. I tried to imagine how it feels to be muted, to have one's voice stripped away, as I ache for my father to utter a word. I tried to imagine what is born with each of my children as they slip out of me toward a world I hope will be clearer than the one in which I was conceived. On this side of the Pacific, the American side, old identities fade with time, the way pictures lose color in the sun. I stare at a photograph of my mother in a red Auzai dress on her wedding day. I cannot read her face, a face that has been lost and remade as easily as names are changed. I look out towards the other side of the Pacific, in this vast expanse of ocean, a body large enough to contain our collective tears. I long for the two sides to meet so I can be whole again. Can words stitch back two worlds? Which way is up or down, forwards or backwards? Everything tumbles in the waves and washes up on shore, smooth and pleasing as sea glass.
Elizabeth, as you may know, we always begin by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Do you have a story like that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Absolutely. When I was tuning into that, just the image came right up. And it's really the story of when I was pregnant and became a mother for the first time. And I know as water people, these stories are usually related to water. And I really feel that my pregnancy and holding this baby in my womb and my water space, and then becoming a mother, as you parents know, has completely, my life has never been the same since. The experience of becoming pregnant for the first time and really growing another human being in your body is such a privilege and an honor. And at the same time, it's what people have been doing since humans have become. So it's such a singularly unique, it was such a blissful, orgasmic experience for me, but it's what connects us to all of humanity. It's how all of us came through here. We all came through our mother's womb. So it was something that changed my life, but it's also how we all came through here. So that was the memory that really came through.
Like you, pregnancy was also one of those life-changing moments, as it is. I mean, I feel like that's the cliche about parenthood, and you just cannot know until you know. But how is it for you as someone who works with the human mind and specifically the link between the mind and water? How did your particular skill set shape how you thought about motherhood and pregnancy and holding another being in your own waters?
I love how just water guides our conversations and our consciousness, because right now water is just telling me like it's the ancestral stream that connects us to our ancestors, our descendants, and it's this continuity of water in the life cycle of our earth and in the life cycle of our human race that just water connects everything. It has the memory of everything. It brings forth new life. And as a psychiatrist who works with people with their emotions and their mental workings, I really view this continuity of whatever a person's experience is as so connected to where they came from and what they're leaving. And so we're all just a part of this stream of life.
Can you tell us about your ancestral stream?
I'd love to. So my ancestral stream is really a current around Pacific Ocean. My parents and grandparents and ancestors are from Vietnam, but after the Vietnam War ended in 1975, they had to leave the country and migrated to Honolulu, Hawaii, this small archipelago in the middle of the Pacific. And that's where I was born and raised as, a Vietnamese American in Hawaii. And then as I grew up and left the islands to go to college in California, I just continued to follow this sort of like current, this North Pacific gyre that brought me to California. But I really feel like it's circling back. It's circling back to California. And I just have to honor the timing of that current. It's not something that I can control. Like I miss Hawaii a lot, but I'm raising my kids here in California. They're super rooted in California. So that's where my stream is right now.
I'm curious, Elizabeth, about the turbulence of that too, because though we can hear in your voice your acknowledgement of where you've come from and the places you've inhabited, and being in and on the edges of the Pacific Ocean is a beauty and a treasure, though it is also very powerful. And when we look at Hawaiian waters in particular, and actually where you are now too, Northern California is some powerful ocean. There are a lot of Pacific moments, very calm, very beautiful in that way. And then there are very beautiful but very turbulent and powerful motions to water in that part of the world. Have you any specific memories or thoughts when you think back to pregnancy and becoming a mother that helped you deal with turbulence, the turbulence of change, the turbulence of becoming something new, someone new?
Yeah, I love the idea of I often talk about riding the waves of life. Like we ride waves externally in the ocean, but there's also an internal current or turbulence that we also have to learn how to navigate and ride. And as someone who really focuses on that, I really develop this sort of internal, how do I ride my own waves of life, both internally and in my life, not just on the water, but the waves of my life, becoming a new mother or changes in my life. I think our relationship to water, on the water and outside water, really helps us apply those same principles to how to ride the internal waves in our bodies and in our emotions and our minds, and also just the waves in our lives.
Have you any examples of you applying that you're willing to share?
Yeah, let me think into, there's been so many waves to ride. I think one thing I'd love to share is just around my professional sort of evolution as a psychiatrist.
What led you to psychiatry in the first place? I'd love it if you could start there.
Oh, sure. So I think I've always just been fascinated by people and their stories, which is why I love podcasts like yours. And then I was always like a great listener and observer. My family was, there was a lot going on in my family, being a refugee family, settling into Hawaii, starting over, learning how to live in that culture. There was just a lot going on. And then there was mental illness. There was mental illness in my family. Of course, I didn't know that was what it was called. I just knew that there was a lot of turbulence in my family. And as I went further along in my schooling and just like kind of riding the waves in my own family, it was like, oh, I think this is a way to learn how to ride these waves, of turbulence is through becoming a psychiatrist and learning, at least one model of how to ride this. And then as I developed into my own psychiatric practice, I realized that, this is one model. This is one model of how to conceptualize human experience, human turbulence. And then there's other models as well that I wanted to integrate into how to work with humans and psychiatry and mental health. That sort of has kind of evolved into my multidimensional work with using, traditional psychiatric, paradigms as well as the consciousness of water itself.
What does that entail? I'm actually not familiar with the conventional psychiatric paradigm. I'm just curious to know what made you decide to blend your passions for both your work in psychiatry and also your love of water. What was that? What was the impetus for merging the two?
It just felt like a truer expression of what is going on. So modern or Western psychiatry has a very sort of limited view of mental illness and someone is struggling with something. These are the symptoms. This is the diagnosis. These are the medications. And that felt very one-dimensional. And it felt like it wasn't the fuller story. It wasn't the deeper truth. And so it just became almost like not even an impetus. It became just like a searching for what is the fuller story? What is the deeper truth around someone struggling with these internal struggles that we can never really know what someone's internal struggles look like, but then they express it externally in a way that psychiatry might call this. And then as water people who are really interested in understanding the deeper levels of what is going on, there was also a view of, could this also, and I'm thinking about the ancestral stream, which is so related to who is in front of me and how are they experiencing the internal and external struggles in their life that is not disconnected from their ancestral stream of what they inherited through the waters from those who came before them and what they are here to pass on to their descendants.
Do you work with people in a way like that, Elizabeth, where you really discuss your familial lineage and perhaps what is at the front of people's minds in their daily life when it comes to thinking about where they've come from and who it was that raised them and what kind of people their parents were?
Absolutely. One thing about psychiatry and mental health is that has always been, the cliche is like, you blame everything on your mother. So there is already a understanding that we inherit things from our parents. But the Western sort of very rigid model of psychiatry, like this is your diagnosis and that you blame everything on your mother is again, a very simplistic, one-dimensional view of what is actually your experience of yourself and how was your parents' experience of yourself and influence on that. And what is the traumas or the experiences that your lineage has gone through, as well as the gifts and the wisdom and the intelligence that your lineage brings forth that we also don't want to lose. And how are you a unique expression of all of that that only you can hold?
This feels like a great place to transition to your beautiful book, Aloha Vietnam. I loved reading it. I have a lot of questions about it for you. You write about the lead character and quote, "At the ocean, I forgot all about my family being different. She, a 12-year-old, discovered boogie boarding despite the fact that her parents didn't approve of her going to the beach." And you write so sweetly about the wave sliding experience, quote, "But catching a wave was like asking the ocean for a dance. She always ultimately had the choice to refuse you. And I love the way you talk about dropping in and the speed and the exhilaration of that. It was very obvious that you yourself are a surfer. And so I'm curious about whether the experience of having a family who didn't support your curiosity about the water was a firsthand experience that you harvested for your character. And if so, what was it like having parents who feared the water? And how did it shape your relationship with the ocean?
It definitely was a firsthand experience. Growing up in Hawaii, I loved the ocean. But my parents, being refugees from Vietnam who had their own sort of fears of water and the ocean and were very sort of like protective of their children for a variety of good reasons. They weren't the parents who took me to the beach and took me out on the boards. And in fact, it was the very opposite. I would have to like sneak out with my friends and like borrow boards and lie to my parents about what I was doing. And it created this sort of like, conflict and sort of like, just, it wasn't a fully expressed experience of being able to fully inhabit my love for the ocean and riding waves. But at the same time, it's who I am. It's part of my ancestral lineage and stream. And, just honoring that process of, I growing up, I'm like, oh, I wish I had parents who were more water people who could show me the way. And then, the beauty is my parents are who they are, and they, gave me my life. And there's a reason for this experience I had of feeling an innate calling to the water, but having, a variety of reasons that wasn't fully expressed or supported. And I think that really gives me a unique opportunity to reach people who may have had a similar experience, but we don't really hear about that. Like growing up in Hawaii, you see the surfing culture, you read the surfing magazines, but you're always being presented with people who like know what they're doing and have a fully supported family and community supporting that. And I think there's a lot of people like me who I hope, but I don't really hear about it. I don't really hear about the people who, for a variety of reasons, have found it difficult to really fully inhabit that part of them that is so true.
An's mother in the book speaks to this topic. She says, quote, "I think about the thousands of my fellow countrymen and women who died as boat people trying to leave Vietnam, how their bodies were lost in the waves of the Pacific Ocean as they tried to escape war and poverty, to find a new home to establish their lives. The dark waters of the ocean still hold their pain, their trauma, their tears, the stories of their unlived lives echoing like ghosts underwater." So many of us think about the ocean in terms of freedom and play and expression, but of course there is this whole spectrum of relating with the ocean. Did you experience this kind of complexity of ancestral relationship to the water? Was An's mother's experience true in your own family as well?
Yes. I mean, my family fortunately came to Hawaii via plane. So we didn't come by boat. But so many of my people, so many of my Vietnamese lineage, which I think we're all connected to, did go through a harrowing voyage by sea to flee Vietnam. And so many lives were lost. And just even in the fleeing, I can understand why my mother and grandmother were always so protective of our lives. They didn't understand why we would willingly go to the ocean for recreation and play to risk our lives if we didn't have to, because so many of our fellow countrymen and women had no choice. They had to go to the ocean to risk their lives. And it wasn't for recreation and play. It was for survival and carrying on hope for the next generation. And that hope for the next generation, that we made it safely to shore. My mom and grandmother were like, why would you go back into the ocean to risk your life again? Like that is not what we want you to do. And yet someone like me who was born in Hawaii didn't have that lived experience of leaving the country or feeling what it was really like to have to risk your life to start your life somewhere new, I didn't understand their overprotectiveness, their concern. I just wanted to go play in the ocean. But now that I understand it better, I have this really fuller appreciation of my lineage's relationship to water. And so much of that is also just stored in our emotions, that even if we don't know the actual story, we can feel this inheritance in our emotions. And that's where the ancestral inheritance of generational trauma comes through in mental health symptoms. That even if you don't really understand why you might have some sadness or heaviness or trauma in you because you never experienced it in your direct life, maybe someone in your lineage or your collective people have, and it lives on within you because our cellular waters all communicate with each other.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so beautifully put. It makes me think about how pretty much all of us have a story of our parents and parents' parents living through large conflict. When we look at the last 100 years of human history, 2 world wars and wars all over the planet. I have a story with my dad's dad fleeing the islands in the Adriatic Sea as a little boy. He got sent from the island of Vis, which is between Italy and Croatia. He got sent all the way to New Zealand at the bottom of the Pacific as a solo little boy to flee the Nazis coming through and taking over all those islands. And then I think to my father and his internal waters being very turbulent, having a very turbulent internal life. And he knew that and tried to do better throughout his life, but it was very, very difficult for him. And the wonderful thing for me was that he would tell me that even though he was in it and struggling, he would tell me how he was struggling at least. And he was always speaking to me about how happy he was that I would be stopping that line of trauma for the men in our family who had lived through so many things. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you would promote in people and family relationships? Is a willingness to communicate, even if you can't communicate, saying that, oh, son or daughter, I would love to tell you of what I'm feeling, but I can't find the words. Is that helpful? Is it good for us to speak like that?
Yes, it is. And you sharing the story of your father is such what I'm talking about, of this ancestral stream of trauma or adversity that we go through, that we experience internally, and we can't help but pass some of it on to our kids. But each generation really does try to do better for each generation. And the more communication, the more opening of those channels we can have between the generations, the more there's ability to heal both the legacy, like, stopping that in your generation, but it also heals the ancestral stream moving backwards too. That's where, when you can tune into the ancestral stream of those that have passed, there's still healing that can be done for them. And that's why I wrote the book from mother and daughter's perspective, because it's really this intergenerational healing between 2 different generations, where we're trying to understand the other's experience while still staying true to our own. That's really going to facilitate this healing.
I love how you do that too. I love that dance in the book between those perspectives. And yeah, I found that really unique. I don't think I've read anything in that style before. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I was curious to ask you, Elizabeth, as a practicing psychiatrist, why you chose to use your time to create a work of fiction. What's the value of fiction and art, and how does it relate to well-being for you?
Because storytelling heals. Sitting down or talking story or writing down a story or sharing a story is a really healing endeavor. It is this communication that we're talking about. So as a psychiatrist who's interested in healing, like I became a psychiatrist because I'm interested in healing, there's a model of psychiatric healing that I practice professionally. And then I know, and it's my hope that this book also provides multidimensional healing through just sharing a story, through opening up different ways of feeling and experiencing and reflecting on our own lives and journeys and on other people's lives and journeys, and an expression of myself was also just something that I think as a water person, you feel called to just to do as part of who you are. You want to express yourself.
Mm.
I would like to ask you about that, the balance of expressing yourself and the perhaps some specifics that you could share with listeners about how to balance those aspects of ourselves of, say, in your case, for example, art, the ocean, and then your human-to-human relationships in the world. How do you dance that line between those aspects so there is enough light of your attention on each of them?
Yeah, I really love this term of just like multidimensional, of kind of always viewing yourself as a multidimensional being that is tending to all these different dimensions of you. So I think a very simplistic model that I grew up with was around like, oh, work-life balance, right? Like, how do you balance work and life or like motherhood work balance? And I feel like those are just too simplistic of a model, and the model itself creates this false dichotomy of we either have to choose one or the other, whereas the framework of being a multidimensional being is that you have multiple dimensions of yourself that you inhabit at all times. And it just may be what dimension or part of yourself is being called to come to the forefront in the moment or in a situation, but knowing that it's really a dance. It's really a dance all the time. And that right now my children are not in this room, but I am bringing my mothering, my mothering identity into this moment right now. I am bringing my Vietnamese American identity just in this conversation. I'm bringing myself as a writer, as a psychiatrist, as a water keeper, as a woman, as a partner, like at all times. I'm inhabiting that all the time. It's just like, oh, like what is being touched on to bring that forth? What am I answering from? But it's like we are all that all the time. And so it's just, that's the context or framework I sort of use for myself and the people I work with.
It makes me really curious about the idea of consistency and how in our modern world, it seems like there's a popular liking of consistency in personalities. So if you have like people that you meet and perhaps they meet you one day and you're in an overly artistic dimension of yourself, and then the next day or that afternoon, you're a very different version of yourself because of refocusing of another dimension of your being. How do we navigate a rather rigid modern world that likes things like conformity, compliance, and consistency when we ourselves are very fluid creatures?
I think it really comes from within you, of feeling that sort of integration of all these parts of yourself, so that you know who you are, that you're the same person showing up. Like, I mean, I experience this quite a bit in terms of like when I go and sit on the sidelines to watch my kids' soccer game or softball game. I'm very aware of like, okay, right now I'm inhabiting like this mothering role, but I know there's like the part of me that's like, wishes she was surfing sitting right there as well. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else, sees of me. It's that I know that I can hold all these different parts of myself, even if I have to show up in different situations or contexts. So I think you're right, we live in a modern world that really wants to put people into one easily defined identity, because then it makes it easier for other people to know what to expect. But as water people, we are so fluid, we are so multidimensional, and owning we can be multiple things, the shape-shifting nature of water. When we can just really own that identity in ourselves, we can just flow through all the different roles and spaces we inhabit.
Speaking of multidimensional, Can you speak to the layered meaning of the Vietnamese word for water?
Yes. So the Vietnamese word for water is nước, and nước means not just water, but it also means country. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that until like later on that. But when I found that out, it just was like light bulb moment that the Vietnamese word for water and country would be the same thing, because the Vietnamese people actually have a very rooted connection to their motherland. And Vietnam is a coastal country. It's a country in Southeast Asia that has like the prime real estate, like waterfront view that every other Southeast Asian country would die for. The entire country, it's shaped like a dragon that borders the coastline. It's the coastline from north to south. The entire country is on the coast. And I think the Vietnamese people have a very deep relationship to their land and their waters. Obviously, there's a lot of turbulence going on in those waters right now, just around, there's a lot of conflict going on in those waters, which I think speaks to a lot of the history of Vietnam as well. There's been a long history of conflict and war and trying to gain autonomy and independence. So there's a real connection between the word nước, and I think it's in the Vietnamese consciousness too. As you really talk to other Vietnamese artists, this same theme comes up quite a bit, which is so interesting to me, because there really is like the consciousness of a collective people that is carried through their waters. I mean, everyone has a unique expression of it, but there really does seem to be this theme of water in a lot of Vietnamese artistry that it just feels like that's part of who we are.
Mm. In Aloha Vietnam, An's therapist, Dr. Tanaka, shares with her, she says, quote, "The more you know and pay attention to your inner world, the more you will be able to direct your external life in a way that honors your true self." I'm interested to know about any practical exercises that you prescribe for cultivating attention to our own inner world.
Yeah, the buzzword these days is meditation, but I feel that this practice of really tuning in to what's going on inside of you through contemplative or meditative practices. And it doesn't always have to be sitting still and closing your eyes. It's about just really quieting external inputs. We're so externally focused. We're like content driven. We want to see and hear and consume what's outside of us, because we often feel like that's what's enlivening us or making us who we are, when we can actually turn our direction inward and know that everything out here actually starts from in here. Everything that's created out there actually was started from someone's idea or imagination or vision. So just really kind of shifting the focus from being externally oriented to being internally oriented through whatever practices that help you to do that. For me, it's, meditation or yoga or, embodiment practices that really just help me tune into what's going on inside of me, both in my body and my emotions and my thoughts. It really helps us get very familiar with our internal landscapes, both in our minds and our bodies.
Do you have that same experience when you're in the water, when you're surfing, or is that a different sort of classification of experience?
It feels different now that you're talking about it. Like, because when you're out there, like you better be paying attention. Like you can't be like, just like. So there's such an awareness of your environment when you're out in the water and the ocean that also feels like you tuning into your true self, but it's different than what I'm talking about. And I think the two complement each other. Because what Dr. Tanaka is trying to say, and I'm Dr. Tanaka, and I'm I'm really like trying to use these people to say what I want to say, is that there really is no separation between your inner and outer world. Like we think that there's such a distinction, but they're really two sides of the same coin. They're really reflections of one another. So this fluidity of being able to move between your inner and outer world is a concept that I really, practice myself and then try to help people understand what that actually feels like and looks like and how to practice it on a daily basis and then in their lives.
Mm. Can you speak to your own surfing life? What enticed you into the maybe semi-forbidden ocean, and what's kept you coming back for more?
Sure, and I will like transparently say that like I've like been stuck in advanced beginner mode like for decades because I don't live near the ocean right now. And so I know I'm a surfer, right? Because like that's who I am. I love riding waves. There's just when I listen to you guys talk to like surfers, whether they're big wave riders or whatever, or professional riders, like I feel the same thing, but like I'm not like a very advanced surfer, which I think is also just like it's great to be able to be a part of the surfing club and to identify as a surfer and just say that we all love that sensation that of riding a wave. There's no comparable feeling to it in that I've experienced. So I think from my first like boogie boarding experience in Hawaii, and it was because we had class field trips at school. My parents never took me boogie boarding. It was like in maybe 7th grade that your class took a field trip at the end of the year to Bellows or Waimanalo. And that was the first time that I was taken to a beach and given an instrument to ride. And I was like, okay. And as soon as I did it, I was like, I just wanted to keep doing it. But it was hard. It was hard to actually like develop that with the family I came from because I couldn't really go home and be like, I love this. I want to keep doing this. I mean, I think I did. I'm like, oh, I'd like to get a boogie board. And they're like, no. Or like, it'd be like, I want to go learn how to surf. No, like that's just not going to be allowed. And so growing up in Hawaii though, like you can't stay away from the beach. So, you find your ways, you catch rides to the beach and you borrow boards. But I think there was this, I never really had someone like take me under their wing to teach me surfing, which I think I still have a longing for. Like I was always like, I just wish someone who was like better than me would just like take me under their wing and actually show me a little bit about how to get better. And that's I think that's something that like I still long for, and so and now I don't live close to the ocean, so it is a barrier that I don't get to go there as much as I'd like. Yeah.
One of the notes I had written down in prep for having a conversation with you this morning was about nature deficit disorder and the tragedy of that even a term like that exists in this modern world. Is this something you encounter in your work? Is this something that you encounter that has that name attached to it, or you can see that it's in there as a thread through people's stories?
Yes, I think the majority of the people in our modern societies have nature deficit disorder, whether we're calling it that or not. I mean, there's different severity of how it can present, but I think we are all, maybe not all, maybe there are people who are definitely living much more attuned, but I would say the majority of the people in the modern world are disconnected from nature, disconnected from living in rhythm and connection to nature. And that it doesn't even show up as a disorder because for a lot of people, it's the mainstream life of waking up and going to work and sitting in an office for 8 hours a day. That's nature deficit disorder, but it's become normalized. It's become like, this is what you do for a lot of people. And I think our children, especially who are now more addicted or just spend so much time on screens, digital technology, you can see how it's, they're less interested in having some of that just sort of unstructured downtime in nature. The pace of life has gotten so fast. It's not the pace of earth time and nature time. So I think all of us in the modern world are experiencing nature deficit to some degree.
What are the clinical presentations of nature deficit disorder? How do we recognize it in ourselves?
I think, well, for adults, I think there's like a real maybe a longing to spend more time outside or in nature, or to live a life that feels more natural to us, that is more in harmony with our natural rhythms, that is closer to the natural world and the earth and the waters. So I think for some people, it's like this longing. There's an awareness of it and a longing for it. And then I think you go down maybe to a more sort of maybe different severity of it, where that longing, that actual like feeling of it might already be covered up, where you don't even feel that anymore. You're just kind of living a much more disconnected life. And it's going to cause a lot of stress, tension, a lot of mental health symptoms of I'm depressed and anxious and, stressed. Like so much of what I see coming to mental health is due to stress. People are just so stressed out these days. They're super anxious. They're feeling disconnected and isolated, but they're not viewing it as, oh, because I'm living a life that's disconnected from nature or from my true nature. They're viewing it as, oh, I'm depressed. I'm anxious. And so I'm looking for a doctor to give me some treatment for this. But there's a much bigger upstream root cause.
This makes me think back to your statement earlier about the line between the internal and external worlds not really existing. The barrier there is not as clear as inside, outside. And I think about that in terms of nature and non-nature then. So do we view ourselves as not nature, not a part of nature, when we think of nature deficit disorder, and that if we're just with each other and humans all the time, is that nature deficit disorder? Can we really say that when we ourselves are part of the natural world here? And I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, but I find that a very interesting line too that we've yet again constructed.
No, I love it. I love the reminder that we are nature too. And yet so many of us are not living our true nature. So in the same way that nature out there, like the natural flow of water can be redirected through construction of dams or canals. I mean, there's a whole argument that if it's man-made, that it's part of nature. So I'm not going to go there. But I know in working with people, even though we are nature, like we see in our environments that nature can be heavily reconstructed and heavily, what's the word I'm looking for? That word.
What is the word?
I like the hand motion. I wish people could see the cat-like motion you're using to claw at this word.
Interfered with, maybe.
Experience, yeah. Altered.
Yeah.
And so, like so many of us, our true natures have been restricted, diverted, altered, suppressed, or limited. So even though we are nature, our true, authentic, natural, flowing states of harmony and well-being are not being expressed. So just because we're nature and we're hanging out with other humans, if we're all sort of artificially diverted versions of ourselves, it's not necessarily like there's nature deficit there. There's nature deficit there.
Please stay tuned while we take a quick break to acknowledge the folks who help make our podcast possible.
If the first 50 years were an experiment,
to prove that a business could be
responsible
and successful,
turns out it's not just possible,
it's profitable.
So what's next?
What's next is simple. It's human-powered, and it's finding the joy in doing difficult things.
What's next is turning capitalism on its head
and putting all our money where our mouth is.
What's next is unstoppable.
Thanks to Patagonia for their continued support this season and for prioritizing purpose over profit to protect our wondrous planet, our only home. Born on the back streets of Byron Bay, Stone and Wood is a certified B Corp started by three mates who wanted to make a beer business with a difference, a brewery for the community. Through their ingrained foundation, Stone and Wood donates money and volunteer hours directly to the communities where they work and live, focusing on the environment and social causes at a grassroots level. Thanks for your support this season, Stone and Wood, and thanks for giving back to our community here on the Northern Rivers. Learn more at stoneandwood.com.au. Elizabeth, I was so curious about your multidimensional psychiatric practice because it seems like you actually prescribe water as one of your methods for healing, and I'd love for you to speak to that prescription.
I do, and I love that. I love that as a multidimensional psychiatrist, I can prescribe medicines, and water is one of those medicines because I've experienced myself how water is a medicine. And so that prescription can look in like a whole different number of ways. For most people, just spending more time in or around or near water is going to help them with their stress and anxiety and feelings of disconnection. So I definitely tell my clients, I want you to go spend more time in nature. I want you to go be with water. And then more like specifically, because like that would help everyone, right? Like everyone needs a prescription to go spend more time with water. Like that would benefit everyone. It's like put it in the water, put water in the water. But for specific people, it's like really like tuning in to what is going on in their lives and how can we really harness the healing power of water in a specific way for them. So just for some examples, I have found that flowing water, the actual energy of flowing water, the sound of it, the constant movement of it, the presence of it has been a very healing prescription for grief, for loss and grief. So for clients who I really feel like, wow, there's a lot of sorrow here around some loss and grief they're feeling, like I can feel it. I can feel it in their heart and their waters. And I feel like they need to really like let it flow. They really need to release it. That's what crying is about. But there's just like a lot of like locked up grief in our bodies that we need help releasing. And I really tell people, to go sit by water, to go sit by flowing water. And then I might give them some exercises around what exactly I want them to focus on or what I feel like are their pain points that really could be soothed and facilitated with the water's consciousness and the water's love and the water's energy. And then, there's a lot of different ways. Like I can prescribe water in a different way. For some people, they just need like a real like flushing, a real cleansing, like an ocean, like woof. And so I will tell them.
We know about the joy of a hold down.
Yeah. Actually, so can I ask you a really selfish question? What can I do when I haven't been able to surf for a couple of weeks and I'm starting to come undone and I'm freaking out a little bit, but there's no waves around?
Well, what do you do? Because you go weeks without getting in the ocean too, Elizabeth.
Yes. So this is where I really talk about connecting with the healing energy of water multidimensionally so that we can connect with it physically, which is obviously the most direct and, immersive way to actually physically go there. But there's water's all around us. We're actually touching water right now. We're actually touching the ocean right now because water's in the air and water molecules are all connected to each other. So if you can really tune into just the energy of water itself, you can always transport yourself to the energy of water. And so I've created, like meditations around connecting to the spirit of the ocean and connecting to the energy of different aspects of water that we can really tune into. Again, this false dichotomy between inner and outer. You really can't. I mean, yes, it's a little different to be actually riding a wave. But if you're feeling a little bit like in this modern world, like I haven't been able to surf, I haven't been able to get to the ocean, there's something in my inner world that needs soothing that the ocean can provide. There is a way to connect to that. There is a way to bring that out in yourself.
Mm. I can imagine how the language of the healing nature of water can seem a little bit abstract for some people, probably not to most people who are listening. But I just wanted to remark that there's actually a lot of peer-reviewed data now about the physical influence that water, like you were saying, running water, has on our brain chemistry, on our physiology. It's well proven now. It's actually not just a concept.
Totally. And you're probably familiar with the book Blue Mind by Wallace Nichols. It's so well researched around all the studies that have shown how water does make us feel better. It makes us healthier. It improves all these measures of our well-being. And the science is always will catch up. It will catch up to what we already know, that water makes us feel better, and it doesn't really have any side effects. So the science will actually catch up and really tell us what is going on. But there's already a lot of research that validates that.
Do you feel like we need it to catch up? Do you feel like there's something in us that just sort of demands that our intellect has a seat at the table as well in life? Like, I feel like like with surfing, for example, we feel all this magic. We feel all these sensations through our skin, through our eyes, through our ears, through even the sense of smell in the ocean with surfing. And then somewhere along the way after riding waves, we try and include our intellect, our mind into it somehow, though it's really tricky, and I think that's probably why so many people have problems with how surfing's represented through things like Hollywood movies or magazines and whatnot, because we all have a different experience with our unique time in the water. But I'm really curious about that science lags, and it often does lag and then catches up to things like you were just saying. Is that necessary for healing as well? Is that just a human thing? No?
It's not necessary for healing. And I think it's really dependent on people. Like, I myself don't need it. I don't need science to tell me what I know and feel. For a lot of people, it helps. It helps them to have the science to back it up, to help them feel like there is data that can help explain why there is phenomena. And that's part of the beauty of being a part of a diverse human collective, is that there's room for all of us. There's room for all of us to have this human experience and find meaning and joy and pleasure and how to navigate this human experience to the best that we can. There's like 8 billion different ways to navigate this human experience. And there's no right or wrong way. Water sort of lets us know that we all need water, and water will support all of us as expressions of life. And that, for some people who need the science, that's great. And for some people who don't, that's great too. And I think for myself, being a multidimensional psychiatrist, I've had to have one foot in both worlds, where I grew up like being a psychiatrist and like having a medical license and prescribing medications. You grow up in a very evidence-based, you have to really cite the evidence for everything. But that's not my true nature. My true nature really is, I feel it, I know it, this works. And it's really about being able to hold both. That's what being a multidimensional psychiatrist is I can hold both at the same time and hopefully meet whoever where they're at as well, and give them what they need.
What is human ecological restoration?
That is a term that I coined myself as I was looking for a way to use words to describe what I'm doing, which is, I think we talked about it earlier in our conversation when I was saying that so many people aren't really their true natural selves. Like there have been artificial constructions and diversions and limitations that have stifled what their true natural selves are.
And that can be family, and that can be a traumatic event, and that can be ancestral impact. It can be so many things.
Exactly. In fact, all of us have had some degree of that. I speak to the modern world in the last, 500 years, but I'm trying to think even like about the people who lived much closer to the land in our indigenous histories. I wonder if they had less of that. And I think they did. So I think it's really been this modern shift that has taken us away from living as nature. We used to live as nature. So there was less of a separation between humans and nature. And as we have become more modern, there's become more of a separation between humans and the natural world. And then there's become more of a separation between us and our natural selves. So in the same way that we're seeing environmental restoration work out in the physical environment, restoring habitats back to what they used to look like before we built this on it, before we diverted the water this way, restoring habitats. Externally, I feel like there's a similar process that we humans go through if we want to restore ourselves back to our most natural selves that lives in harmony with us and the environment, but in a modern context, because we're living in the modern world and our environment now is the modern world. So how do we restore ourselves to that true natural state in harmony with our modern world? And that's the work I do with this human ecological restoration work through just everything we've been talking about.
How do you start people on that process if they come to you with this sense that they are not living in their truest self? How do you hold people's hand and guide them down the beginnings of restoration?
It really is such a journey of letting people know that their true natural selves is inside of them. So I call it restoration work because it's restoring or uncovering what's already there. So it's about just peeling back the layers and the understanding the ways that, like you mentioned, our trauma or our family or society has shifted things in us, but really getting to set the framework for someone of this is the process, this is like what we're going to do, and this is the journey, and just giving them that space of really holding that context of there is a true natural self in me, and we're going to just work to uncover it slowly and help and support you in living it. And everyone's uniquely different in what they're presenting with. So most people are not coming to me with, I want to be ecologically restored and living my true natural self. It's more like, I can't sleep, or I've been having panic attacks, or I've been really sad. And so starting there, but really helping them to understand that where they're at might be a downstream symptom of all these things that we've talked about that have prevented them from really just, because if your true natural self, you're going to feel well. You're going to feel well. You're going to feel well in your mind and body and spirit. And that's the goal. That's the goal is for everyone to feel well. So if you're not well in some way, if you have some symptom in some way, and that's a clue, that's a signal that your body, your ecology is alerting you to, oh, there's something that's not working in my environment, something that's not working in my inner or outer ecology.
More and more, I experience people who are in the throes of anxiety. It seems like anxiety is such a prolific experience at this point in our culture around the world. Do you see engaging with nature or some layer of nature deficit disorder as playing a significant role in the overwhelming anxiety so many of us are experiencing?
Absolutely. You're right. We have a pandemic of anxiety in our modern world. And that can't be, that can't just be coincidental that all of a sudden more than half of people are feeling anxiety like that. There's no, that's got to be a real red flag or sort of just no brainer that something's going on a larger scale that is making people feel really stressed and anxious in their bodies and minds. And if you really want to look at that from, a broader lens of, okay, it's not just you and your job that's stressing you out or whatever's going on in your family that's stressing you out. Like if everyone's feeling this way, there's probably a larger, societal structure that's really creating the conditions for people to feel so stressed. And the demands that our modern world have put on people would stress anyone out. We're not living in rhythm and harmony with the natural world, just the timing and the pacing of what our true natural selves would feel better with. So if you're being forced to work more and faster, of course you're going to feel anxious. And nature doesn't work at this rate that like the modern world is demanding of us.
What are the strategies that you employ to touch the living world, to reconnect with the living world in your obviously modern existence as a parent, as someone who's living away from the coast, as someone who has a busy practice? What are the strategies that you employ?
One of the strategies I employ is having this almost constant awareness of my state of being. So the same way that when we're out in the water, we're kind of constantly scanning the water and making sure that, we're aware of what's going on. It's developing this same paying observation of myself at all times. Like what is going on in my body?
What are you asking yourself? What does that sound like in your mind?
It's become a more like, how is my body feeling? Like what is going on in my body? Like right now, I'm very aware that I've been sitting for a little longer than I'd like. And my left butt cheek is starting to feel a little sore. And that I feel like I need more movement. I feel like I need more movement. But that's just a small sensation, right? It could be, I get some news that is really emotionally difficult for me. And I really honor oh God, I'm really feeling sad. I'm feeling sad. And that's okay. That's okay to feel my emotions. What does my sadness need? Because when we suppress our emotions, we're also just building up a lot of energy that gets stuck in us. So to really be fluid and freely flowing all the time, you have to really honor whatever's coming up, whether it's a physical sensation, an emotion, or a thought. An anxiety-provoking thought might be coming into my mind around oh God, I need to do this, this, and this. And then I'm noticing oh, I'm getting a little anxious about this. What does that need? What do I need to bring myself back into balance for all these areas of my mind and my body and my heart to feel well again? So this constant attunement of oh, I'm feeling a little sadness is not unwell, or butt cheek aching is not unwell, but these are all small signals that if I ignored this, it could become bigger things. So if I just ignored this aching in my back and sat at my desk 8 hours a day, every day, and was just this is just what I have to do for my job, months or years down the line, I'm going to have chronic back pain or, decreased mobility or whatever, a lot of downstream physical health symptoms. In the same way, if I feel sadness from something, or I feel some other emotion from just like little things that come up, and I don't really pay attention to them, I just kind of like ignore them or let them build up, I don't really try to understand where they're coming from, I'm going to build up an emotional clog of emotional backlog that over time, again, over months and years and decades, might lead to like a really severe depression or really like constant tension and anxiety that at that point becomes, a clinical diagnosis. But if we kind of can backtrack it and really focus on wellness, which we're not teaching people around, like how do you be well, and how do you stay well, and how do you prevent these downstream things? It's about really being paying attention to what's going on and the thoughts. So much of us have these negative loops of thoughts over and over around. Most people have negative thoughts around their own self-worth and their own self-esteem. I would say that everyone in my psychiatric practice is battling these thoughts.
What are the words that you hear people saying to themselves in those loops?
I hear people saying, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, those are the major ones. I feel like everyone, if they really can work through their feelings of self-worth and self-love, that's really at a lot of the core issues of these feelings of depression and anxiety. It's feeling, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, actually. Fill in the blank, what? I'm not a good enough mother, I'm not good enough, actually. It's like one of the most common psychological struggles that people have.
Touching on this topic of emotional attention, paying attention, catharsis, reminds me of chapter 46 in Aloha, Vietnam. And I have to go back and apologize. I totally westernized your protagonist's name. I'm sorry for that. Can you tell me how to pronounce her name properly?
No, you said it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And her mother's name?
Swan. Yeah.
Swan speaks from the other side. She's passed away. She speaks about her connection to her family despite her death. And that chapter came with a distinctly different tone than any of the other chapters. It made me wonder if that was an especially cathartic chapter for you to write. I saw toward the end you acknowledged that your father passed away last year, and I was wondering if there was some personal connection with that chapter in particular.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when I wrote that chapter, and I wrote this book just channeling whatever wanted to come through. And I originally did not have that chapter with Swan's, spirit speaking to Aing, but really speaking to the reader from the other world, the other side. And so I definitely, but she wanted to have, a say. She wanted to say. And I think because she was speaking from this other dimension, it probably had a different tone because she was in another dimension.
Yeah.
And that was what wanted to be channeled through, that there was this message from a different dimension.
Did that resonate with your own experience of ancestral communication, or was it purely channeled as a fictional inspiration?
There's no separation between those two. And I would say that I wrote this manuscript 6 years ago, but then it just languished in my writing drawer because I don't know, I didn't feel the energy to birth it. And I understand now why, and I want to tell you about that because that probably speaks to how we started this conversation. But then when my father passed last April, about a year ago, there was like this surge of energy that was like, you need to finish this and put it out into the world. And so I just followed that energy. And now that it's out into the world, I'm like, I understand why, even though I wrote most of it 6 years ago, why it wasn't the right time for me to birth it into the world yet. because I wasn't ready to mother it. I wasn't ready to be the mother that this book needs until now. So even though the book itself might have been like the same words, and 6 years ago, it was published 6 years ago, I wasn't ready to mother it. And like books really do need some mothering. I really viewed this birthing of this book into the world as like a third child. And I wasn't ready to mother the book in the same way that I can mother the book now. Like I'm much more ready to mother this book and watch it develop into whatever multidimensional being it's meant to grow into.
Can you tell us about the Water Keepers community, please?
I would love to. So the Water Keepers community is like such like probably the most special thing I do in my multidimensional life. I was talking with a dear water friend a couple of years ago, and he said something about like he just said the word water keeper. And I don't think I'd ever heard someone say that before to me. But when he said the word water keeper, all of a sudden, like all the cells in my body just like lit up. And it was like this awakening of this memory that was stored in my cells. And I was just like, water keeper, water keeper. And there was like this awakening of knowing, even though I didn't really know what those words meant, that I am a water keeper. And, and those words are still true to me now. I am a water keeper. And to me, a water keeper is someone who has this sacred connection to water that science may never explain, but we know it. So I don't need science to explain, am I a water keeper or not? I don't need to have a certification, am I a water keeper or not? Like I know it. I know I'm a water keeper in every cell of my body. And for me, what a water keeper means is you have this sacred relationship to water, but you also have a sacred commitment to be a protector of water, to be a voice for water, to be a channel for water, to be a vessel for water. So water is this amazing force in our planet, but it doesn't always have a human voice. And that's what makes it so vulnerable, because in our modern human world, we often are listening to, again, this content we're consuming is through human voices. It's like the human narrative. Water doesn't have a voice. It does so much for us, but it doesn't have a speaking voice. So water keepers have this real, you guys are water keepers. You know, you're water people, you're water keepers. It needs voice. It needs a voice to really interpret all of the wisdom and healing and intelligence that it has. And so the Water Keepers community is something that I founded to connect other water keepers around the globe so that we can support each other in being water keepers. And this human ecological restoration work is what I focus on in the Water Keepers community. Is the people in the Water Keepers community are the people that we are doing this active work of restoring ourselves to our most truest, natural, well selves so that we can serve and honor water in the ways that we are meant to be, in the ways that we are meant to do, because we need to listen to water and we need to follow water's wisdom in order to heal and restore our planet. So
that's so beautiful. And it ties together this idea that our wellness is intimately linked to the wellness of the living world. It's difficult to have a thriving or to work back toward a thriving, living world if we are not well in our own selves.
Absolutely. That is the cornerstone of the Water Keepers community sort of framework, is that there's no separation between us and the outer world. And the biggest contribution we can be making is through doing our own inner work and embodying wellness in ourselves in order to be a part of this well ecosystem.
That's really beautifully put. I really like
Indeed.
that as a wrap up, as an ending. Unless there's anything else you were keen to share, Elizabeth.
You know, after I published this book, I felt this current of energy to take my mother and children back to Vietnam. So we went back on this ancestral healing trip to Vietnam, and it was so healing. Again, I was just following the waters. Like my body felt this surge of, I need to go to Vietnam. So that was, again, this attunement of just like, I'm feeling this in my mind and body and heart. I need to go. And it really felt like a cycle of healing, this healing trip I needed to take. And we landed at the ocean in Vietnam, 20 years on the, like, to the day. I hadn't even planned it, but it was the 20th anniversary of my maternal grandmother's passing. And the night before, my mom had said, oh, your grandmother came to me in my dream, and she wanted to like let us know that, tomorrow's the anniversary of her passing. And it felt like, again, one of those just divine, messages from beyond, from another dimension, that my grandmother, who did not want to leave Vietnam, there was such healing for her, for me to bring back her great-grandchildren to the shores of her motherland. There was healing for my grandmother who had passed away years ago. I could really feel her presence looking down on us, seeing her daughter, her granddaughter, and her 2 great-grandchildren. There was healing for that.
Wow. What a beautiful experience. And it's empowering to know that healing is that accessible.
That is the message that I also feel like I want to underscore, is that healing is always available, and it's never too late. It's never too late to heal an ancestral wound.
Thanks so much for listening with us today. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing an episode with a friend. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at What Are People Podcasts, and you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, whatarpeoplepodcasts.com.